So this week I had just a couple of verses, excuse me, out of Isaiah chapter 44 I wanted to look at. So it is on your menu or whatever we're supposed to call it. If you want to follow along, small enough, we can get it on there pretty easy.
Okay.
Thus said the Lord, King of Israel and its Redeemer, the Lord of armies. I'm the first and I'm the last. Besides me there is no God. Who is like me? Let him call out. Let him tell it and lay it out to me. Who has made known from old the signs of what is to come? Do not be afraid, do not tremble. Have I not informed you and told? You are my witnesses. Is there any God besides me? Is there any rock? None that I have known. So I think when I first read this, I was like, yeah, I'm not sure we've struggled with polytheism as a culture in about, 1,500 years probably, right? So like kind of the main point here is, yes, there's only one God. I don't think that's that disputed these days. It's probably more, is there a God or is there no God than there is like multiple gods, right? So I was trying to figure out how to kind of get in these people's shoes as I was looking at this passage. And so I started thinking about, okay, why was there a temptation at all to follow some of these other gods, right? And so I thought about it and thought, okay, they were a lot more at kind of the mercy of the elements than we were, right? They recognized that a really bad storm could wipe out their food supply. They could starve. They recognized having a poor harvest could do that. They were just a lot more afraid of natural disasters or coming enemies and those sorts of things than we are. And so what did they do? They did anything they could to protect themselves from the natural elements, right? The problem God had with them a lot of the time is they're always trying to hedge their bets. Well, if God doesn't come through, I've at least got a backup plan, right?
Yeah.
Baal, he's not much of a god, but hey, if God doesn't manage to come through, we always got Baal or Ashtoreth or some of the other kind of Canaanite gods that we only see from history books. But then I started thinking about, why are we less at the elements? Why are we less at the mercy of the elements than they were, right? Well, the last couple hundred years, we've had pretty dramatic changes in technology, in the way we can do food production, in the way we can amass wealth, in the way political systems work, and how we're less at the mercy of despotic kings, that sort of thing. And I started realizing, wait a minute, those things that saved us, that lets us feel more in control, look an awful lot like those ancient pagan deities, right? These are the things that protect us from being vulnerable. So we may not struggle with worshiping, Baal anymore. There's a lot of people who I think worship science or technology. Every time we see a problem in the world, we would always say, oh, science can fix it sooner or later. Or maybe it's politics, right? I know a lot of people, maybe sometimes ourselves, that just think, okay, we get the right person in office, that'll fix society. Or maybe if we can get art to change and teach people about the right things. Or maybe if economics were more just, right? There's a lot of these kind of big meta things that we've invented the last couple hundred years that have been effective. They protect us from feeling as vulnerable as the people did when this was written. Do we have a tendency to worship those things, or at least rely on those things, rather than having to wait and have the faith that God does? I think there's a parallel in our lives with kind of the individual things we use to cope and get through it. Our hobbies sometimes, or the resources we have to get through life. The things that help us cope when things get hard. Or maybe the things that we tend to rely on that solve problems in our life. Do we trust our friends and other people, knowing our family's going to bail us out if things get bad? Do we trust our intellect, or our skill set, or our bank accounts? When I'm having a rough day, what do I go to? It's a distraction. Is it something that I'm meant to enjoy, but I realize I actually can't do without it anymore? If that were to be taken away, I question if I could live as quality of a life, right? So I think there's a lot of different things that we can substitute. And so reading this passage saying there is no other God, there is no other source, there is no other actual resource that will come through for you, yeah, I think that problem is still hanging with us. And I think we're going to find a lot of things in this passage that our heart is talking to. So let me tease out a few more, and I'd love to kind of get your guys' thoughts. So this first line, verse 6, is one that when I was reading some of the kind of context when this was written talking to people who just lost their home. And so two things going on here is this was likely, this kind of title is, Thus said the Lord, King of Israel, and its Redeemer, the Lord of Armies. This was a liturgical beginning. Everyone would have recognized it. So you know how like some songs just, boom, you're there, right? Whether it's a church or you smell a certain thing and you're back at your grandmother's house, right? There's just certain, either maybe it's a song on the radio, boom, you're back at that moment. This for them would have been temple worship. Tons and tons of their worship that they had done communally, traveling. They don't just hang out on a Sunday, right? They travel often weeks to gather together for this big public event of worship. And you would have heard, Thus said the Lord, King of Israel, its Redeemer, Lord of Armies. So that phrase would sting a little bit because there is no more temple. It got burned to the ground. You can't go back home. You can't go to this thing that you miss. And even the title itself said the Lord, King of Israel. There is no more Israel. Israel's been gone for probably 100 years at this point. Fine title, right? Real impressed, God. But I think it brings out a point that we have to be careful with God as well. Because back in the day, you served a God based on what you got out of it, right? Yeah, I'm happy to serve God as long as He keeps the protection up and keeps make sure there's enough food on the ground and brings the rain. But as soon as we get conquered by the bad guys, and they would say this, right? Well, obviously your God was no good. Ours is bigger and badder because we won. So what good is your God? The God of losers, right? I think God is challenging that a little bit here. You don't get to switch God to the winner every time. You don't get to switch to what works. And I think I see that same thing in my own heart, is I'm a little mercenary with my relationship with God. What am I getting out of it? Is it working? Do the pieces of my life feel like they fit? We also, I think, can be a little bit utilitarian with our relationship with God, right? And so we find ourselves in a situation like this, having the thing we want, the space of worship, or the country we want, they're gone. Am I still going to agree with the statement, there's no other God but mine, if it's not working for me anymore? But then he continues, I'm the first, I'm the last, and besides me, there is no God. Who's like me? Let them call out. Let him tell it and lay it out to me. Who has made known from of old the signs of what has been told? I think all those places that our kind of heads and our hearts went at the beginning, right? Whether it's these big systems that are in the world that have made our lives look very different, whether it's the little coping mechanisms or our own personal strengths and weaknesses that we want to rely on in hard times, I think God is calling those things out right here. Okay, if you're really worthy of their attention and their worship, prove it. So I think God is reminding us all those things, even the good ones, are going to fail us sooner or later if we put the weight on them that we tend to. They will fail us, whether that's our relationships with our friends and our family, whether it's our own skill sets, whether it's just the things that, bring us happiness and bring us distraction. They'll fail us if we put too much weight on them and treat them as more than what they actually are. So hopefully nothing I'm saying here really shocks anyone, right? We know this. We know this tendency. So if we know this, we know there's only one God, we know there's all these other things we're not supposed to blow out of proportion and try and rely on, why do we? And why is God being such a stickler about it? Why do we put trust in things that aren't worth putting our trust in.
I think a lot of times it's easier, you know, if your way of comforting yourself is watching TV, it's easier to just sit down and turn on the TV and, you know, than it is to go to God with your problems.
Yeah, it's much easier to pretend like there are no problems, right?
Along that same line, I was thinking that because you can see it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you said the TV, I thought, well, that's what I was, you know, we have a tendency to trust in those things that we can actually put our hands on, or at least we have this idea that we can see them and in some sense that we are able to manipulate them, you know, for the outcome that we want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good phrase. We prefer gods we can manipulate, control in some way, yeah. Okay, why is God such a stickler about it? Like, no big deal, God, chill out. I'll trust you two. Why is this such a big deal?
Isn't it in Isaiah where he says, I'm a jealous God? For one thing, he knows he's the only God. He knows for sure that we're following a lie or a false God, something that's going to let us down. And I think he's trying to save us from wasting our time on that.
A lot of these things interfere with our relationship with God. You know, it's like you can't serve God and mammon. You know, if we have all these 4 or 5 gods in our lives besides God, it interferes with our relationship with Him.
Yeah, I think a piece of it too is just that God loves us too much. He knows these things are empty and that they will ultimately fail us, right?
Yeah.
These things are not going to be enough. They are not capable of holding the weight we're trying to put on them. And that's usually a really painful process to learn, right? When this thing you trusted and believed in fails you. I mean, that's shattering almost every time. And God can see it. It's like watching someone you love, you know, it's like watching one of my kids run out in the street when you see a car coming, right? He knows where this thing's headed. He's trying to free us, I think. And I think you see that in this last verse. Then in verse 8, he is saying this out of the goodness because he loves them, not because he's some kind of a, you know, stickler. Because he knows. He says, look, don't be afraid and don't tremble. The first thing I think he's reminding us is just emotionally, right? He's comforting them. Like, I'm the Lord of your emotions. Because that's often what gets us there, right? After the false thing. It feels right. It protects us from fear. And God says, don't be afraid. I'm enough. I can protect you in that. And then the next line is, have I not informed you? I think that's about our heads, right? I know, I understand. I think we turn to things because we do want some understanding of what's going on around us, right? I think that's why our culture is so addicted to information. We feel like if we have just enough information, we'll be able to solve it and protect ourselves from either those ultimate questions or those ultimate fears. And God's saying, I can inform you. I can tell you what's really real, what's really valuable. And then he says, you're my witnesses. I think there he's reminding us of our identity and what it looks like to trust. Right? What does a witness do? They speak about the things they've seen and what they've experienced. And when we are in places where we want to trust other things, I think God's reminding us, saying, no, you can be my witnesses. You've seen this. You have seen me at work before. Why would I be doing it differently than I am right now? And I think this final point is this. Is there any God besides me? And then he adds something the second time. Is there any rock? Is there any solid place? Is there any place of stability and strength in any of the things you've been looking in besides me? Is there any other rock? Is there any rock? There's none that I've known. And so again, I think God is inviting us into remembering that there is no other resource, there is no other distraction, there is no other system in the world that's going to be enough, that will ultimately satisfy us.